Welcome back, guys. The primary focus of this channel is entertainment and pop culture commentary, but something I'm even more passionate about is foster care. I want you to consider getting involved in foster care. And so, to that end, I'm going to tell you all the ways in which it is absolutely horrible. I have good reason. Foster care is very serious business. You have the well-being of a traumatized child in your hands, and so you need to take it seriously and be prepared for the worst. Also, if you're prepared for the hard parts, they won't seem as bad when you come across them, and it's going to prevent you from feeling like a failure if you knew that this stuff was normal and part of the ride all along. Just so we're being transparent, not all of this stuff you're gonna run into. I haven't run into half of the stuff that I'm gonna talk to you about today. These are things that I've heard in training, things that I've heard from friends of mine, but it's always best to plan for the worst while hoping for the best. Since it's National Foster Care Month, this video is part of a fundraiser to raise money for Safe Families for Children. It's an organization that tries to keep families out of the foster care system to begin with, and all of the ad money for this video is going to them as well. So if it turns out to be long enough, you gotta watch a mid-roll ad, but it's for a good cause. Last disclaimer, I am a little pressed for time, and honestly, there's just no way to make this a fun video. So let's put this over the top of me speaking. See, isn't that better than staring at my face the whole time? All right, let's just jump in with the absolute worst part first. You are probably going to have to give the kids back, and you will probably have them just long enough to fall in love and care for them as your own, and it will crush your soul when you are rudely reminded that they were never really yours. Reunification with the biological parents will always be the number one goal of the state, and most states are going to go well beyond what you consider to be reasonable in their attempt to give those parents a third, fourth, fifth chance. Please do not treat foster care as an adoption service. You will be disappointed and hurt, and when DCFS figures out what you're up to, they will blacklist you. There is no such thing as being a foster to adopt parent. That is not real. The kids are going home right up to the moment that they aren't. I said in last week's video that I dragged my feet for over a year before finally getting licensed. Of course, I regret this. Once you realize the joy of serving other people, your first regret is going to be not doing it sooner. But the reason I delayed was because of a self-survey they gave me the first time. It's got all the standard things like, hey, are you comfortable handling child trauma, medical visits, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, no problem. I got that. The last question was, are you comfortable returning the child back to their birth parents even if you don't agree with them? And I was not. It took me a very long time to get over the judgment that I felt for the bio parents. I was honest with myself, and I knew that if mom and dad met a few goals for a couple of months and got their kids back, I was not gonna be happy. I remember thinking at the time, how could anybody put anything over their kids? I would die for my kids. I love cheeseburgers, but if somebody told me that I would lose my kids if I ate another cheeseburger, I would drink kale smoothies with a smile. Well, turns out cheeseburgers aren't quite the same as what these parents are dealing with, so I was talking completely out of my butt. When I got to thinking about it, I realized there are a lot of things in my life that I'm not very proud of that I do more than I should. It took me a shameful number of years to stop watching stuff. If it were so easy, addiction wouldn't be a thing. It's a very complicated subject, but if you're gonna foster, you're gonna have to find compassion for the bio parents, and you're going to have to want the best for them and the child, and ultimately that means helping them heal whatever is wrong with their own life that made them treat that child in the way that they did and made the state step in. Your goal has to be reunification of a healed family. But you won't want to sometimes, and that's not right, but you will have those feelings from time to time, especially if the parents relapse. It's very common for someone to be clean for 6 months, be on the verge of getting their kid back, and the pressure of it all pulls them right back under, right at the finish line, and the state will start their clock right over again. Then you're gonna have to be the one to tell that kid, psych, you're not going home, mom and dad messed up again, and you are gonna be the one to deal with the fallout from that. And there won't just be fallout from those types of things, there's gonna be fallout from the general trauma in these kids' lives. And I am not talking about the kind of trauma that you see on TikTok. This isn't the mildly distant parent that 25-year-olds use to explain their terrible behavior. These kids don't end up in the system because mom and dad are extra mean or a little bit distant. They end up there because it isn't physically safe for them to be home. These kids have been left alone for days at a time without warning and without any idea who was coming back or when. These kids have been physically abused and other kinds of abuse that I don't want YouTube to get angry about me saying out loud. They have been emotionally tormented, called things you wouldn't dream of calling another human being, let alone a child. There are small children in the system that have seen things that I haven't seen in my nearly 40 years on this planet. All that, and they don't have the developed skills to deal with any of it. So it comes out. And it almost always comes out as bad behavior, horrible behavior. It will be your job to identify trauma-related behavior and work to correct it and help that child deal with things that have happened to them before they were 10 that you likely have never dealt with even as an adult. There's a real stigma amongst people about older kids, like, oh, they've got too much baggage, teenage kids, we don't want teenage foster kids because they're gonna act out worse, they're gonna have so much worse behavior. Well, you have to understand these kids have been bounced around the system where they feel like no one cares about them, sometimes for years, sometimes since they were single digits. So yes, they're gonna have a chip on their shoulder, but that doesn't make them any less deserving of care and love and affection. They need a permanent home, sometimes even more than small kids do. Little kids are gonna have trauma. Even infants taken into the system are going to have trauma. And I know that sounds crazy, like infant trauma, that's not possible. I felt the same way. I've seen it. Teenagers can be more difficult, but they can also be easier in their own way. They can reason in a way that a small child can't. If you are considering foster care and you have room for an older kid, I urge you to give them a chance because almost nobody is. Now, you're going to receive training and you will get ongoing training. You will know what kinds of things to expect, but in the moment, it's really hard to remind yourself that this kid is traumatized when they are traumatizing you and your home with terrible behavior. And it can range. You'll have outright rudeness, completely shutting you out. The total opposite, being right on top of you, needing your undivided attention every second. Breaking things, running away, sneaking food. Eating disorders are very common. Stealing, general depression, all of it. Sometimes it will come out of nowhere. Here's a fun example I've been told about. They adopted a sibling group from foster care. They were not foster parents themselves. And these kids had been bounced around the foster system for years. Now, they were having some of the normal new placement things, but overall it was going really well. One day they were heading somewhere that was a little farther away than normal and in a different direction than they usually drove. One of the kids starts having a full-blown panic attack in the car. They had to pull over, find out what was going on. They finally ascertained that the child thought they were getting rid of them. Longer drive than usual, heading out of town. Obviously, they were taking this kid back to the agency. It was over. Think about that for a second. This kid was fully adopted. Permanent. The papers are signed, the gavel is banged, the whole bit. But every day, this child still woke up thinking, well, today could be the day they just get tired of me and drop me off like an old bag of clothes at the Goodwill. I can't imagine living with that mentality, but that was the reality for this kid that had been bounced around for so long, and their behavior reflected that reality. And you think that's crazy, right? It is crazy, and you can't reason with that. Trauma behavior is not reasonable at all. And what takes the behavior bit from hard mode to nightmare mode is that you cannot discipline these kids like you might a normally adjusted child. Remember, they're not your kid. And you wouldn't discipline someone else's kid in the same way as your own, right? Except this someone else's kid lives with you, but they might have seen things and been called names you can't imagine. And if you raise your voice, they might have a panic attack. Needless to say, getting your point across that a certain behavior is unacceptable in your home without further traumatizing a kid is a tightrope. And you have to be even more careful because you don't know what else is hiding under the surface. In training, they told us horror stories like I'm telling you, and one was about a foster father who was accused of the kind of abuse I can't say out loud. The family was investigated because that's a very serious accusation. Foster dad was innocent, and they didn't find out until much later what really happened. The child was taken into protective service for an unrelated reason, but nobody knew that Biodad was secretly abusing them in that way. He would tell Bio Mom, I'm gonna tuck the kid in and read them a bedtime story. And that is when the abuse would happen. So when foster dad said, hey, let me read you a bedtime story, that kid had alarm bells ringing and told their caseworker he attempted to abuse me. And they weren't really lying because that was the kid's reality. That is what happened every time a bedtime story got read. And of course, this leads to the next point. You, as the foster parent, are the bottom of the totem pole. If your kid accuses you of something, you are guilty until proven innocent. One, because the state has to protect the kid and all accusations are taken seriously, but two, because everybody secretly believes that you have the potential to be a creep, especially foster dads. I don't know what this is about, but us dads get the sideways glance. I volunteer in the daycare in my church whenever they are shorthanded, and the policy is men are not allowed to change diapers. There's just this general feeling in society that guys are all capable of certain kinds of horrendous activities. Now, I can't really complain too much about the church thing because, I get to smell a kid and just alert the lady that I'm working with, I'm sorry, you need to hand me the adorable sleeping baby you're holding and change this one who has pooped up their back. I don't make the rules, lady. Now, false accusations aren't terribly common. I don't want to blow that up too much, but you will always kind of be under suspicion. And the fact remains that you are everybody's last priority. Everyone wants to help the child. Most people want to help the parents. The people at DCFS are treading water to keep up with the caseload and the paperwork. As a foster parent, no one cares about you or what you want, and you have no power or rights to speak of anyway. The only support you're going to get is from nonprofits whose goal is foster parent support, and they are invaluable. Here in Southern Illinois, we have one called the Restore Network, and I can call someone there day, night, weekends. They bring food when you first get a placement. They have clothes if you need. Someone last week said they work at one of these in Tucson called Gap Ministries. These kinds of organizations are a real lifesaver because DCFS is not a bad organization, it's just overwhelmed. Your caseworker wants to help you, they just don't have the time. As I said, you don't have rights anyway. You don't get to make any decisions for the child that is under your 24/7 care, and that can get really frustrating. You will also be mad when the parents exercise the rights that they still have. You need permission to get haircuts. The bio parent can prohibit you from taking the child to whatever your religious services are. You can't make any medical decisions. You have to plan well in advance if you want to take a trip, if you're even allowed to. You are a full-time guardian without any of the power of guardianship. The last thing I want to scare you with is that it is a long and expensive process. But Greg, don't you get paid? Yes, I do. I get about $550 a month plus a food card worth about $50. So roughly $600 a month for full-time care of a human being. Clothes, diapers, food, entertainment, everything. You are not going to make money at this, guys. You're going to lose money or time, probably both. For example, my kid uses my family dentist because the state insurance covers a dentist that's 25 minutes away. I pay out of pocket to avoid using that. And it's a long process too. If you get a placement, go ahead and commit to about 18 months at the absolute bare minimum. More than likely, it's going to be 2 or 3 years before the child either goes back home or it becomes clear that they can't and permanent placement is pursued. I want to reiterate, nobody that I have worked with in the foster care system is bad. These are not your stereotypical DMV worker that's just riding a desk and they don't want to help you. They do. They want to help you. They're good people working in the system, but it is such a convoluted mess of bureaucracy and red tape, and they are understaffed and overwhelmed with cases, and they're treading water every single day. They can't help you as much as they want to. They cannot. And I want to really focus on that you hear a lot of horror stories about these horrible caseworkers. They're out to get you. They're out to get kids, whatever. People like to paint them as these terrible government workers. They're not. They're just like any other worker, and they get into it for the right reasons, and then they get overwhelmed by the sheer morass of the foster care system. I hope I didn't scare you too much, but I do think it's important to be realistic about what you're getting into. The fundraiser for Safe Families is still going on through this month, and they are a group that tries to keep families and children out of the terrible foster care system, and I think you can see why. The button to donate and their website is linked below. I hope you consider supporting them or foster care in some way. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.